In part 2, we saw how African ports became centers of maritime networks more reliable than anything the medieval world had seen. Now we'll discover what happened when European explorers finally encountered this expertise, and why the truth was buried for centuries. April 1498. Vasco da Gama's expedition reaches the East African coast after 10 months at sea, and the mission is in crisis. Half his crew has died from scurvy during the brutal passage around the Cape of Good Hope. His ships are battered and taking on water. Ahead lies 2,000 miles of unknown ocean to reach India, a crossing his navigation tools make seem impossible. When da Gama's fleet enters Malindi harbor on the Kenyan coast, he encounters something that shatters every assumption about African capabilities. The harbor contains ships larger than his Portuguese caravels, with rigging systems more sophisticated than European designs. Merchants conduct business in multiple languages, trading goods from across 3 continents. Most importantly, when da Gama shows his navigational charts to local pilots, they immediately identify errors and offer corrections based on extensive experience in waters Portuguese explorers have never seen. The man who agreed to guide da Gama to India was operating in the sophisticated maritime networks that had developed along the Swahili coast over centuries. Some Arab sources, written decades after the voyage, identify him as Ahmad ibn Majid, a navigator who had authored multiple treatises on navigation and was known from the Red Sea to the South China Sea as an ultimate authority on ocean routes. Da Gama's chronicler Álvaro Velho recorded his amazement as the pilot prepared for crossing. No European-style charts. Instead, he studied star positions with more precise instruments than the Portuguese carried. He tested wind patterns using techniques refined over generations. He observed ocean conditions with expertise that seemed supernatural to European eyes. Most remarkably, he confidently predicted they'd reach India in 23 days. What the Portuguese couldn't understand was that the pilot wasn't making educated guesses. He was following maritime highways that African merchants had traveled for centuries. Historical records confirm they reached India within the predicted time frame. When they arrived at Indian ports, local traders immediately recognized the pilot and welcomed him as a familiar figure, revealing the well-established commercial relationships that connected African navigators to markets across Asia. Álvaro Velho's account, preserved in Portuguese archives, documents da Gama's frank admission. This pilot possesses knowledge that appears far beyond our capabilities. But the full extent of European dependence on African expertise becomes clear in Portuguese maritime records from the following decades. Portuguese sailors systematically adopted African techniques for predicting monsoon changes by observing wind patterns and atmospheric conditions. They studied African methods for determining position using star groups and ocean swell directions that European navigation had never incorporated. Portuguese captain Tomé Pires documented what pride initially prevented da Gama from fully acknowledging. In these waters, the Moors possess knowledge far superior to our own. Portuguese archives reveal that African pilots were regularly employed on European expeditions throughout the early colonial period. This represents one of history's most significant but unacknowledged knowledge transfers. We've just shown you Portuguese records admitting African superiority. Now I'm going to trace exactly how that acknowledgement disappeared. But first, if this documentary series has taught you something important, hit the like button and share it. This is the kind of history that gets buried because it threatens comfortable narratives. Now let's examine the archives. As Portuguese military power grew through superior weaponry, a disturbing pattern emerged. Portuguese forces established control over existing trade networks and gradually replaced experienced African navigators with Portuguese pilots. Here's what happened over the next 150 years. From 1498 to the 1520s, Portuguese records document dependency on local navigators and acknowledge superior knowledge. Multiple chroniclers describe the sophisticated ports, the advanced vessels, the expert pilots. They name individuals. They admit European inadequacy. The evidence is explicit in their own words. From 1550s onwards, Portuguese chronicles began describing the Indian Ocean as largely empty waters before European arrival. The sophisticated maritime networks they had encountered, documented in their own earlier records, were reduced to coastal settlements, awaiting enlightenment, or completely omitted from official accounts. By the 1600s, compilation histories omit African contributions entirely. Navigation techniques originally learned from these networks become presented as European innovations. The commercial systems that had been operating for centuries become described as European discoveries. By 1650, the expert navigators who enabled Portuguese success appear in most histories only as the Moors, or the pilots. Their expertise and the civilizations that produced them reduced to anonymous footnotes. European histories transformed what should have been called the Age of Instruction into the Age of Discovery, creating a narrative of European innovation overcoming African ignorance when documentary evidence reveals the opposite was true. When we reclaim this history, we reclaim more than facts. We reclaim a legacy of African scientific innovation, mathematical precision, and engineering excellence that preceded European maritime expansion by millennia. A legacy that European colonialism required minimizing to justify its own existence. This is the story of African maritime mastery. Systematic, sophisticated, sustained across millennia, and deliberately written out of mainstream historical narratives. The evidence is undeniable. The achievement is extraordinary. And the truth can no longer be ignored. If this three-part series changed how you see African history, here's what I need you to do. 1. Share this series. Knowledge is power, but only if it spreads. 2. Subscribe to this channel. I make documentaries like this because mainstream history ignores African achievement. There's more coming. 3. Comment below and tell me what hit you the hardest. I want to hear from you. If you want to support this research, check the description for ways to contribute. Thank you for watching all 3 parts.